Hello. So, hi everyone. It seems like you could not hear me before. I just want to make sure that we are good on sound now. If I can get on okay.
I can hear you but not see you.
Okay, well, let's start with the sound. The sound should be good enough. So while we sort out the technical issue, maybe I'll just reintroduce the topic and the episode real quick. Sorry about that, and thanks for your patience. So this is the 11th episode of Misplaced, a series by Livin Farms. We are officially entering the second half of the series. And we're really, really excited because we're starting to introduce new topics. So I was giving a little bit of a recap about how we concluded April. Last week, we celebrated Stop Food Waste Day. And the day before Stop Food Waste Day, we had as a guest speaker Shu from Pasar Grab, who was talking to us about how we can rescue food waste and we can actually repurpose it to use it to, nurture communities that are in need. And now we move a little bit farther away from that topic, or better, farther down the food systems to look at situations in which food waste already is created and exists, and how we can take this food waste and we can turn it into nutrients and food for the soil. So potentially for new plants and for new agriculture. So I'm really, really excited today to have two speakers actually from Iceland. We have Julia, the head of research and development, and Björk, the project manager at the Composting Community. Welcome, Julia and Björk. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you too. Thanks so much for making the time and for joining us. So we really want to, hear from you about your work with the community. And I'm not going to give away too much to our audience, especially I'm not going to, experiment with pronunciating the actual Icelandic name of your social enterprise. I leave that to you. I tried it and I don't want to butcher it. But just a little bit of an introduction for our audience. Björk and Julia are really passionate about working with the community, saving the environment, and they're really passionate about conservation. So today they will talk to us about one particular solution to composting that seems to work pretty well for the Icelandic soil and for the Icelandic communities. So do not forget to drop your questions for Julia and Björk in the chat and in the comments. And they will address them with me in around 15 minutes after their presentation. So without further ado, Julia and Björk, please feel free to share with us. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And thank you again for having us. This has been a wonderful series, and it's very exciting to be part of the larger conversation. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
So yes, episode 11, we're talking about feeding the soil by use of composting. I'm Julia. I'm head of research and development. Björk is here in the room. She's our project manager, but she's taking very diligent notes right now. Our company name is quite hard to say, and as a non-native Icelandic speaker, I struggle with it too, but it is roughly Jardgerdarfelagid, and it means like the compost company or the compost community. There will be a quiz on the pronunciation at the end, so take notes. A little bit about us. I am a soil scientist. I recently completed a postmaster's fellowship at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in East Tennessee, where I was primarily focusing on nutrient cycling in tropical ecosystems, where they have usually a lack of phosphorus in their systems, whereas in Icelandic soils, they usually are lacking nitrogen, which is going to be relevant to why we use Bokashi. Before that, I finished my Master's of Science from the University of Iceland, where I was researching the use of organic fertilizers on degraded soils. There's a lot of soil erosion in Iceland, and there are a lot of efforts to try and rebuild those soils. Björk is our project manager. She is currently also working as a facilitator in city workshops for the city of Reykjavik. She got her diploma from Chaos Pilot, a program in Denmark, where she focused on participatory processes and collaboration. And between my love of soil and her love of community engagement, we felt that compost was a perfect place for our skills to meet, because compost is ultimately its own collaboration between the soil, the microorganisms in the soil, and the people who require the soil for a great deal of different ecosystem services, not just food. We both always want to talk about soil compost user experience. You can always bug us about these topics if you feel so inclined. A little bit about our company. We compost organic material using the Bokashi Method, a method that was developed by Dr. Taro Higa in 1982. It is more of a fermentation process than a decomposition process. So traditional aerobic, or like air-loving composting systems, decompose outside. They need a lot of air exchange. We do more of a fermentation process. It's anaerobic, so zero oxygen. It's more like pickling vegetables than it is like decomposition. We are currently running a large-scale pilot in southern Iceland, where we are attempting to process municipal food waste in this method. It hasn't been tested on this scale with food waste, but we're very excited about our preliminary results, which I will talk a little bit about. But first, I'll explain Bokashi a little more. We like to describe it as making sauerkraut for the earth. So sauerkraut is rich in probiotics. It's good for your gut microbiome. It does the same thing for soil. Soil is a very active place. There are a lot of microorganisms that fulfill a bunch of different roles. And the way that Bokashi processing works is that you have, if you're doing it in a residential setting, you have an airtight bucket, you add your food waste to it, you pour bran that's been inoculated with a mix of effective microorganisms, which include photosynthetic bacteria, lactobacilli, yeast, and actinomycetes. And that bran is a source of carbon for the microbes to sort of get their feeding feast started. When your bucket is full, you add another layer of the bran and you seal it and let it ferment for 2 to 4 weeks. The acidic conditions suppress pests and pathogens, whereas in traditional aerobic composting, you need the compost pile to reach a certain temperature to ensure that pathogens are killed off. In this case, it's a very low pH and things do not survive in it. When you are done with the fermentation process, as you can see in these boxes that Björk had made in her backyard, on the lower hand is newer Bokashi. You can still sort of see that it looks like the food products that went into it, because it's more like the difference between a pickle and a cucumber. Right now we have pickles, whereas it went in as a fresh cucumber. After you mix the Bokashi ferment with soil, you'll get something more like in the top box, where it looks a lot more like compost, more like a fertilizer you would apply to your soils. While it's been done a lot for residential uses, it hasn't really been attempted in terms of a municipal compost pickup strategy. People are definitely doing it on large scale in agricultural settings, but the logistics of picking up food waste and processing it this way has yet to be very fully studied. So in 2020, we were given the opportunity to put this into action. In collaboration with the municipality in southern Iceland called Rangavatalsýsla, as well as with the Soil Conservation Service of Iceland, and with very generous help from Agriton UK, who donated a lot of the effective microorganisms and a lot of advice to us starting this project, we were able to see how well it works on a large scale. Based on our phase 1 results, what we can tell you is that Bokashi is good. However, the corn bags are not so good, which I will explain why. So the current setup in the municipality is that residents are sorting their organic material into separate bins. The bins are lined with corn bags. When the bins are full, they take the corn bags out and put them in a separate trash bin outside for the municipality to pick up those every 2 weeks. It is then shipped to us, where we take it out, sort it, pull out all the corn bags, and process the organic waste using the Bokashi system. The problem with corn bags is that while they are compostable in industrial composting systems, they do not decompose in Bokashi compost. They don't even decompose in home aerobic composting. It has to reach a very specific temperature in order for it to break down. Otherwise, it mostly just functions as plastic. So one of our issues was picking out all of the corn bags, and we figured there had to be a better way than having to go in by hand and remove all the corn bags. The other issue that we were worried about is that when you have organic material in a bucket, there's aerobic bacteria that starts taking action and feeding on the organic material itself. What we want is the anaerobic bacteria to kind of tip the scales and have more control over the system. When the organic material sits for 2 weeks, the aerobic bacteria starts to take over. So there was the risk that by the time we had access to the product, it would have already started to rot and would not be able to be salvaged by the microorganisms that we use to inoculate it. Fortunately, we were able to turn the scales and we were able to get a good fermentation from organic material, but we know that this process can be improved, and so we have 2 different adjustments that we're making in our second phase of our pilot project. The first thing that we're going to do is start the inoculation process at home. We have 30 different residents who have volunteered to participate in a mini pilot project where they will be receiving airtight buckets as well as a spray bottle full of liquid inoculant. So it's a liquid version of those effective microorganisms. We're going to ask that when they add food waste to their bins, they spray it with the inoculant and seal the bin again. Whenever the bin is full, they'll text us and we will pick it up once a week, like every Friday from when they text us. Our hope is that by interacting with the organic material as they put it into the container, first of all, they won't need corn bags to line it with, but also they will realize that if they're spraying inoculant on it, it doesn't make sense to put things like plastic or silverware and things like that into the organic material bin, because things end up there, and we sort of figure that if you're looking at it and you're spraying inoculant on it, you know that it's not going to break down these inorganic materials, and so we'll have less inorganic material that ends up in our stream. Our other adjustment is that we purchased a pulverizer. Very excited about this. It only recently arrived. We haven't even put it together yet. But the idea is that you want an equal surface area for all of the microorganisms to start their feast on. If you have different size materials, everything's going to break down at a different rate, and you have a very inconsistent product. If we pulverize everything before it goes in, all the microbes have equal access to the different surface areas of all the food, and we'll get a more consistent fermentation process and a more consistent product on the other end. But why are we doing all of this? Why have we done this huge pilot project? And why are we trying to make it easier for residents? Well, food waste is a huge issue, and I know you've learned a lot about it in the speaker series. Right now, landfills are filling up. Food waste is going into landfills and creating methane. And at the same time, soils are degrading. These are 2 problems that can be answered with similar solutions. The photo on the right is taken in Iceland along the southern coast. Iceland faces a great deal of erosion due to overgrazing as well as climate conditions, which make it a very harsh environment for vegetation to rebuild itself. However, there are a lot of efforts in refertilizing these areas and letting the ecosystem sort of take itself back. But right now, a lot of the fertilizer has to be imported or manufactured. So in the context of Misplaced, we really feel that food waste and the concept of waste is more of a verb than a noun in itself. Food waste is only waste if it's wasted. The current system is that you spend money to manufacture and purchase fertilizers, you put that on your soil, you harvest the produce, you eat what you can, and the rest of it is discarded and sent to landfill, and then you start the process back over, beginning the line again. But what we propose, and what many people have proposed, is that why not use the waste as its own fertilizer and close the loop? You can use food to feed people, and that can then go back to feed the soil, to feed the people, and you get a great cycle going. There are great issues with food waste and soil degradation. I know you've learned a lot about food waste, but food waste accounts for 6 to 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. Here we have a little illustration that Björk made of an artistic interpretation of what methane looks like coming out of a landfill. Methane has anywhere from 18 to 25 times the warming effect that carbon dioxide does, depending on the sources that you're looking at. But when food waste goes into landfills and it sits in anaerobic environments with no activity, no microorganisms, no fungi to process it, it just generates methane gas. However, that's not the only issue. We're also really relying heavily on synthetic fertilizers to keep the food system going. Currently, 50% of the world's food supply relies on ammonia fertilizers that are manufactured, and that process accounts for 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So just creating the nitrogen for the fertilizer accounts for 1%. Then using the fertilizer accounts for another 1.5%. In addition, phosphate is considered a non-renewable mineral. It is mined for, and so we have a lot of phosphate mines that are running out of accessible forms of phosphorus. So just making synthetic fertilizers when we're also throwing out food waste that's generating methane, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Additionally, using synthetic fertilizers is not great for the soil. Here we have a little illustration of roots in the soil because I want to give you an idea of thinking of soil as a place where there's a lot of activity going on. Soil is made up of air pockets and water. There's also inorganic material or rocks and organic material. And all those things work together to create a habitat for the microorganisms that function and provide resources for the plants. Heavy use of synthetic fertilizer leads to a decrease in the soil biodiversity. So microbes aren't as able to thrive and create the ongoing nutrient availability that they do in natural ecosystems. This reduces nutrient cycling and requires more input of synthetic fertilizers. Additionally, using heavy synthetic fertilizers is often like drinking water from a fire hose. It's just most of it is going to go past the thing that you want to absorb the nutrients. You dump a lot of synthetic fertilizers on the soil, the plant can only take up so much. The synthetic fertilizer then slowly moves down the soil profile before it goes into the waterway and leads to pollution in those waterways. You get over-fertilization of the waterways, you get algal blooms, you get apoxic zones where there's no oxygen left in the water, and now you have a water pollution problem. So not only is it ruining the soils, but it's also ruining water bodies. Furthermore, as plants rely on these inputs, they don't develop deep roots. They end up having much shallower root balls and root mass, and that means that they aren't able to reach nutrients further down in the ground, and they also have a very poor hold on the soil itself, making themselves more vulnerable to climate like wind, heavy rainfall, flooding, things like that. They won't be able to establish themselves as well, and so big environmental events can lead to a lot of loss of vegetation, and once you have exposed soil, it is further vulnerable to more erosive forces. What we see in the role of Bokashi is that we are participating in the grand collaboration of soil as a community. The idea is that Bokashi fermentation creates an ecological fertilizer with a very active microbial ecosystem. We're not just throwing pure nutrients into the soil, we are rebuilding the resources. One of my favorite microbial interactions is that of the mycorrhizal fungi. So myco means fungus, rhiza is the root. So these are fungi that work with the root system, attach to the root system, and offer an extended resource availability. So what they do is the hyphae of these fungi, so the little like root type arms that come out of the fungi, can reach parts of the soil that the root can't. Root can only go so far. It can't reach the nutrients that are far away, and the nutrients themselves, they're ions. They're not moving around very much by their own volition. They're sort of stuck where they are. So the root can only get so much, the bacteria can't move so much, but the hyphae of the fungi can go much further. It's much more flexible. It can reach different parts of the soil profile. So what you have is this collaborative experience between the fungi and the root. I like to think of it as sort of like a farmer. The hyphae are the farmer. They go out and they harvest resources. They get raw food. The hyphae bring the food back up close to the root, where the bacteria are the chefs. They're able to prepare the meal and make the food digestible for the roots and the plant themselves. The chefs then give it to the plant, and the plant, in exchange, brings carbon down and feeds it to the bacteria and the mushroom. Therefore, you can see on the left side, you have a very empty soil profile where the roots can only reach so much and there's a lot that's left untouched. Whereas on the right, you have a very vibrant, almost metropolis city-like experience where everyone is sort of offering a different resource, getting help when they need it, and fulfilling the different needs that they are part of within their ecosystem. Another way of looking at it is as the soil food web. Here you can see the different types of organisms that rely on healthy soil, not just the plants, but different little things that you can't even see, such as the mycorrhizal fungi, non-mycorrhizal fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, and various other larger animals that rely on the soil food web to keep themselves going and to keep the soil web healthy. These are all really important to nutrient cycling, substrate stability, water cycling, even just putting buildings in places where you need to trust that the soil will stay in place. These are all very important to that process. And the Bokashi fertilizer helps keep that functioning ecosystem active by providing food at slow intervals as they need it, instead of having to get all of their nutrients when the synthetic fertilizers are dumped on it at once. So now we look to you as we call to action. I have 3 different points that I think could be useful to anyone depending on what resources they have available, what they're interested in. You can do all 3, but the biggest one is to hold powers that be accountable. I think there's a lot of pressure on individuals to make all the changes that they can to improve the environment that they live in. But ultimately, we have limited resources, we have limited access to different tools, and we also have limited interests. You shouldn't have to be someone who's passionate about soil in order to be able to compost. You should just be someone who can compost because it should be provided to you. So holding municipalities, larger industries, and corporations accountable is really important. However, that is not to say you shouldn't also start composting, because a big part of making these changes is normalizing these efforts. Also, maybe you just really like composting and want to do it for yourself. Bokashi is just one of many methods of composting. I can talk about it more in the Q&A, but Bokashi is great for apartments, for people with small yards who don't have a lot of yard space. There's also aerobic composting. Livin Farms has an amazing mealworm composting kit that you can do at home. There are different ways to do composting. It doesn't have to be just the one that you've seen, just the one that takes up a ton of yard space. It can be what works for you. My final call to action is for you to all think of soil as a place and pay attention to the soil around you. It's not an inert object. It's a living body. It is an ecosystem to its own. It's a bustling city. Whatever helps give you the perspective that there's a lot going on down there. If you walk around and notice the different vegetation, you see different rocks in the area, you can start understanding how this is actually part of the functioning ecosystem. Look at the soil on the top of a hill versus the bottom of the hill. How different is it? Why do you think that is? Another way that you can participate in thinking of soil as a place is to do something within the vein of citizen science. There is the tea bag index, for example, which you can read more about at teatimeforscience.org, where essentially you take a tea bag and weigh it, and then you bury it in your backyard. You wait a few months, take it out and weigh it again. The difference in weight shows you how active your microbial community is in your soil, because you'll see how active they were at eating the food that you provided it. It gives you a really good idea that there's a lot going on out there. It's not just sitting around. It's not just waiting for you. They're living their own lives down there, and it's very exciting. And that's it for my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. That was so interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot of new things. Before we get into the Q&A, I just want to make sure there's no more technical issues. So can you hear me okay, Julia?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Do you want to be joined by Björk for the Q&A so that maybe also our audience can see your partner, and we can make sure to, share questions, and you guys maybe want to share answers as well. Amazing. Well, while you get set up and, take a seat, Björk, just thank you so much for this presentation. I thought it was, full of new facts and new information for us and Misplaced. Of course, we learned a lot about the food system, and specifically, consumer behavior, and a little bit more about agriculture. But you just gave us this very, very fun and entertaining story about how the soil works. And I feel like it was really, really valuable, and I learned a lot of new things. I just want to remind the audience that you can drop your questions for Julia and Björk, so please feel free to do so. Until then, let me just start with a few questions that we have for you, and that I think would be interesting for our audience as well. So, of course, you talk quite a lot about Bokashi fermentation and how you've been doing it at a community level in Iceland in this very, very interesting and exciting process as well. So I wanted to ask how applicable it is for people around the world. Is it a form of food waste processing that anyone can do, or does it maybe depend on the climate that one lives in? For example, I am now experimenting Bokashi fermentation here in Hong Kong, and so far it's going well. But I wonder if it is something that can be done pretty much anywhere. What are your thoughts?
I think, as with all changes that we make and efforts that we put into addressing environmental issues, local problems require local solutions. So definitely, if a different form works for you based on your location, based on your climate, there's always going to be adjustments to be made. And there's no one single solution for all climates, all locales, all individuals. That being said, though, Bokashi in particular is a very forgiving form of compost, because you don't need quite the specific conditions of it reaching a certain temperature, of it sitting a certain amount of time, of it taking up a lot of yard space, things like that. It's a much faster turnover, and it's much more of a controlled environment. One of the issues that is maybe possible in warmer climates is that the microbes do prefer a specific temperature range in order to comfortably function. So not too cold, not too hot. but sort of like in the room temperature range. I don't know if you have the specifics of how, was it 20 degrees Celsius?
It's like 15 to 25 or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you, basically like inside your house.
Yeah. And so doing it residentially, when you just have a bucket that you're keeping in your home, it's quite easy to keep the temperature regulated. If you don't have space in your home, though, and you're keeping it outside, you want it to be like nice springtime weather where it's not crazy hot, not crazy cold. But it is one of the more forgiving ones in that a lot of different climates, a lot of different places can use Bokashi as a form, whereas like cold regions can still do aerobic composting, but it might be harder to get the compost pile to the temperature that you want, or it can be really hard if you're doing worm composting, that the worms like a specific temperature, and you're less likely maybe to keep your worm bin inside, so it might be more sensitive.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Yeah, and I also find I have one of the small Bokashi beans for the apartment. I find that it's like really convenient because there's absolutely no smell. Here in Hong Kong, if we had to do it outside, probably wouldn't work because it gets really hot in the summer. But indoors most of the time we're air conditioning, so it's working pretty well. So I would recommend our audience to try it out. It's also pretty space efficient because you need to kind of like press it down. So it works pretty well here too. Thanks for that. All right, so another question around composting, of course. Since there are different types of composting method, do you think that your solution take a dynamic approach depending on the scale of the project? And you've commented a bit about on it, talking about your community project and the challenges that you have faced, but I want to see if there's more that you can share on that.
Do you want to talk about the logistics of scaling up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why we got really excited about this, especially in Iceland, is that there are like 2 industrial composting plants in the whole country. So if a municipality, especially in rural Iceland, wants to compost, they would have to drive it. Like the municipality we're working with, they used to drive their food waste 100 kilometers, which is like quite a few tons, 100 kilometers. And they're also like losing their resource outside of their own locality. Like they're kind of like just giving it away. So that's one of the great things about Bokashi is it's like very space efficient, it's time efficient, it's energy efficient. And you can, as long as you provide an anaerobic environment for the bacteria, you can kind of like do it at like 2 kilograms or 200 or 600 or like a billion.
But it's also like a bit like if you bake bread at home, you have the materials you need to make a single loaf at a time. Whereas if you decide that you're going to be a bakery, you need much different timing. You need much more temperature control and all these other things that are kind of out of your hands. And that's sort of what we're experimenting with in the pilot. Like at home, you're in charge of what goes into the bin. You're able to interact with it as soon as possible. But in this case, people from all over the municipality have different diets. They have different concepts of what should and shouldn't go into their organic waste bins. So there are all these different things, including just the logistics of getting it to us, that we have to wait 2 weeks for the material, is very different from when you're doing it at home. And so it's the same process, but it's a totally different way of problem solving because everything is suddenly out of your hands. And I think that's the exciting part of working with the municipality also, is that we get to figure out what they need, what their infrastructure is, how frequently can they pick up organic material, how much space do they have to do the processing itself.
That's awesome and definitely very, very interesting. You have to have the response of the community and of the government as well. And sorry if I missed that during your presentation, but I'm assuming there has been a part in which you've educated the community on how would that work and how often does that happen? Do you need refreshers? Do you need adjustments? And I guess my question is how much of your effort goes into educating the community and how much of it is the implementation and actually, running the collection and the processing of the Bokashi.
So now with the 30 homes that are participating in the pilot that we're doing, we want to kind of do it in a way where they don't have to learn anything by heart. They don't have to think too much, and like they don't have to understand the whole process any more than they want to. So we've made it so that like the buckets that they have at home have a sticker with all of the things that they like. If they forget anything, it's all there. They never have to look it up on the internet or like find a brochure. It's just like on the bucket. And we've found that like we've been hosting a lot of workshops to teach just like residents that want to do it, even though their municipality isn't servicing them. And there we found that like a half an hour, 40 minutes with a group of 40 people, and they all get it like this.
It's pretty intuitive.
One of the starting point of the company was Björk leading these workshops where it was really important to her to kind of foster this sense of community, so that if you're starting something new like composting, it's very easy to be like, well, it didn't work. It took me a long time to find out it didn't work, and I have no one to go to figure out why it didn't work. And so it was really important to make it sort of a community endeavor where we sort of go into it being like, well, we've made all the mistakes, so you can ask us about the mistakes you've made, because I can assure you we've done it too. And you can meet other people who are doing it and making similar mistakes. And we're hoping to create the same sort of interaction with the residents that we're doing this mini pilot with, that, you know, we're asking a little more of them, that they have to spray inoculant themselves, but we're going to be there with them. We're going to be part of it so that they don't have to feel like they have to navigate the space on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that really, really helps. And again, I'm referencing the case here in Hong Kong, where I don't think we have a lot of help or like a figure of reference to go to ask questions about composting, or even, you know, what to do with the bokashi once I've finished and my bin is full. So it's definitely really great. If I'm not wrong, you guys have a Facebook group, right, where your community can also exchange with each other. I think, do you maybe want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's quite a lively Facebook group. I think we have around 2,000 members now, which is, I mean, it's an Icelandic, it's an Iceland based one, so it's quite a lot, and it's very lively, very helpful. It's both people asking questions and helping each other out with that, but also people trying to get rid of their fermented material, and other people wanting it. Yeah,
just having like a community to like complain or share their successes or get each other excited. Like a lot of people are on it and haven't even started composting, but they just want to learn more and get comfortable with the idea of it.
And people are so, I mean, we're like talking about climate conditions. 15 degrees is a very good day in Iceland. They come rarely. So people are composting inside, and then they're like figuring out how they can do it outside in the winter when the soil is frozen and you can't dig it in. And like there are a lot of geniuses in there that have found really creative solutions to doing that.
I think it's awesome that you've created this platform where they can share, you know, and learn from each other, and you kind of like pass it on to the community as well. It's not all on you to give the directions basically and the instructions. So that's great. And 2,500 people is quite a lot, I'd say. So yeah, we're pretty impressed by that Bokashi group. Just looking at the questions. Okay, we have a couple from the audience. From Kushbu, this is pretty interesting. Have you started working with producers on using the compost in a large-scale farm? And yeah, I guess this is a good question and something that I had in my mind as well. Do you have plans of continuing to work with the community and government, or maybe also with private businesses in the future?
I mean, we definitely want to. That's definitely on our horizon. I think would be really useful. I think also working with larger farms about like both in terms of taking their organic material to process and then giving them fertilizer gives us a much more consistent stream of like material that's coming to us, so that in making a fertilizer, we have a much more consistent product to give to them. Right now, because we're still very much in the experimental phase, we haven't pursued it too in-depth. One of the things we need to figure out is do a couple testing, like analyses and pathogen testing, and make sure that it is safe to use in agricultural conditions for growing food directly. We just haven't done it specifically yet. Before we do any of that, we want to make sure everything's good.
And like, just to add, like Bokashi is safe. It's just that because we don't control fully the input from the residents, it's more of like we want to be
I want to make sure that what's coming out is something that is safe and reliable. Right now, we've been mostly working on like the processing, like can it be done? And now the next phase would be like, can we do it consistently and create a product that's useful for larger industry? But we definitely have talked to people who have access either to like greenhouses or their own personal farms about starting that, doing experimental experiments with either liquid fertilizer or the solid compost itself. It's definitely something we want to pursue once we figure out the processing itself.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Another question from Roddy. As someone who doesn't know too much around composting, how can I get started? Maybe the one pointer that you have for someone that does not know much and wants something very, very simple to get started.
I mostly know about Bokashi, and the way to get started is either buy a bucket that is ready, or you can even make your own. There are a bunch of videos online about making your own Bokashi bucket, and get the EM, the bacteria that we use to ferment, kind of just, I would say, be kind to yourself as a person that has made all the mistakes with my Bokashi buckets. They are like the most forgiving recipe ever, and kind of just like see how it is to start collecting it. A lot of the buckets that are sold are around 16 liters, but you can, if you are not producing a lot of don't have a lot of food scraps at home, then you can even make ones that are smaller. If you have a garden space, you can do it, like you can dig it there. If you have a balcony, then you can also like mix it with soil there, or you can collaborate with, if you have any friends or family that has a garden, to dig it in there.
Yeah, and just in terms of logistics of how the Bokashi system works is that it's an airtight bucket with like a sieve at the bottom that lets liquid through, but not the food scraps itself, and a little tap to drain liquid. And what you start doing is you collect your food waste in one container. When that's full, you open your Bokashi bucket, you put it in, you add the inoculated bran that has the effective microorganisms in it, you seal it again, you keep doing that, you make kind of like a lasagna of food scraps and bran. And then once your bucket is full and you push it down and make sure all the air is out, you seal it and leave it for 2 to 4 weeks. During that time, you can drain the liquid out the bottom. It keeps it from smelling, and you can also use the liquid if you dilute it to like a 1:100 ratio. You can use it as a liquid fertilizer. When it's done fermenting, you can take your bucket outside and either bury it under the soil or mix it with potting soil to sort of make it a more usable, less organic, heavy soil additive.
Fantastic, thanks. I can't wait for my Bokashi bean to be ready so I can mix it up with my potting soil, and hopefully my plants will look a little bit better. We have one, they're not super healthy right now. We have another question from Andrew. Why not traditional aerobic hot composting? I guess partially answered, but I want to see if Julia and Björk have some more to add to that.
Thank you for the question, Andrew. Andrew is a very dear collaborator of ours from Agriton.
Amazing.
I think the reason we do it, why we started it was very much, we found out that it doesn't emit as many greenhouse gases as traditional aerobic hot composting. So as a person, when I started, I knew nothing about soil or like the whole process of everything. So I think that was a really big selling point for me, that in those calculations, it was doing a lot better than aerobic hot composting, which is doing a lot better than like everything else as well.
Right.
And then it was just really, really easy and it's quick.
Yeah.
Kind of like it was very.
We keep saying it's a very forgiving recipe, but in the sense also that a lot of more food items can go into Bokashi composting. So things that often can't go into aerobic composting, like people often say like citrus peels are problematic in aerobic composting. Meat and eggs and some dairy is usually, but like you can do that in small amounts of Bokashi composting. It can process a lot more. It also, because it's using these microbial communities to break down the food, you end up having a lot more accessible forms of nitrogen that are slow release. Instead of just being like pure organic matter that's been broken down really heavily, it's sort of like a pre-digested fertilizer. And so either your existing microbes in your soil or the microbes that you've added have kind of a better jump start of working through everything, making nitrogen available to the plants, and also just generally storing carbon because of the high organic matter that's in it.
I sometimes like talk about it, or we talk about it as if we look at synthetic fertilizer as vitamin C for a population, then I sometimes say that aerobic composting is kind of like giving a carrot, which is always better than just the vitamin C pills because you get a lot more. But if you ferment the carrot before eating it, it's even better for your digestive systems, which is essentially of the soil. You can like.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, the soil is a lot more than just the digestive system of the earth, but it's a nice way to think about it, like to understand what's going on in there, at least for me.
Oh, absolutely. That makes it much easier for me as well to imagine and to understand. Thanks for that. That definitely a great way to put it. Thanks. I want to ask another question because I know you're super excited about it and you have talked a little bit about it in your presentation. So this pulverizer machine, right, that helps you really break down the food waste so that it makes it more readily accessible to all the microbes. Tell us a little bit more about the magic of this machine. How much food waste can it digest? Why is it so important for a community project to have this piece of technology, I assume? I'm really curious about it.
So it is a special designed pulverizer from a Bokashi company in the States called Bokashi Cycle. So it works really well with like wet organic material, which is one of the hard things in finding a good pulverizer, is that oftentimes it's for dry material, but this uses a chain system to sort of crush the food waste as it goes in. And just in terms of like utility, if you just think about like surface area. So if you have like a book and you want to burn the book, break down the book. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this analogy in a more public sense. But if you have a book and you just like are only going at it when it's closed and like trying to break it down, it's going to take you a while to like get in there and like, and really like if you're painting it or something like that, you can paint the outside of the book. But if you paint every page of the book, you're covering a lot more surface area. And so essentially what the pulverizer does is create more of the pages of the book so that there's more surface area, there's more that you can sort of interact with and more that the microbes can interact with. So, you know, like putting a whole banana peel into your compost, it'll take the microbes a while to start breaking that down. But if you like bruise the banana peel, if you cut it up and give it much more surface area, it starts being a lot more vulnerable to the microbes a lot faster. And the reason it's really useful in this setting is that, again, we don't know where we're getting this food from most of the time, and the way that people put their food into their bins is going to be different. Like I chop up my banana peels before I put them in because I am always thinking about it, but a lot of people aren't. And so we want to be able to just make sure everything is going in with an even surface area so that the microbes can get as much done as possible. And then that also gives you a more consistent product, because you don't want to be spreading your fertilizer and have it be really rich in nutrients in one section and not quite broken down in another section. You want it to be a very even application where all the nutrients are evenly spread out.
It also saves us a lot of time.
Yes.
And will also like reduce the amount of air that will get into the tubs that we're using for fermentation, because we'll be able to pulverize it before fermentation. So we don't need to like stand in it and like chop it up.
I see.
And it can process 1 ton of organic material in an hour.
Okay.
So it's gonna speed up a lot for us.
Yeah, in our pilot before, I think we're doing 1 ton in around 20 hours. So it will speed up a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of your manual work saved. That sounds amazing. And then, of course, if you have the possibility, to chop up the food waste when you receive it, you also take that burden away from the households, right? And still make the bokashi fermentation possible. That's fantastic. So congratulations on receiving your big pulverizer, and hopefully we'll see it in action soon, maybe on your Instagram. I don't know if that has happened already, but I guess that's also a suggestion for the audience to go and check out these ladies' Instagram, because quite a lot of fun illustrations. And I think you got a sense today that they really know how to tell the story and how to make, understanding the soil and how composting works really, really fun and easy. So I guess with this note, I want to conclude the episode today and really thank you, Julia and Björk, for telling us this story so nicely. It was really fun. And we are really excited to see the results of your pilot experiment, which seems to be going already very, very well. And before I say goodbye to the audience as well, just a reminder to please fill out the feedback form for this episode so that you can participate and have the chance to win 150 USD to spend on our web shop. We also have some discount codes for you to use on Livin Farms web shop, of course. And do not forget to tune in also for our next episodes. Next week, we are with Heidi Spurrell, talking about restaurants and sustainability in food and dining. So, well, once again, Julia and Björk, thank you so much for making the time and for telling us your story. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you soon next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much.